This is a story that isn't really about heroes or villains. It's about a choice that nobody, and I mean nobody, wanted to make. It's the story of the generation that gave up the Earth. So the story kicks off with this really powerful, almost defiant statement. Just try to imagine that day, the final goodbyes, the hatches sealing shut. In that one moment, they were pioneers. Yeah, they were voyagers. But they weren't losers, not yet anyway. But here's the thing. If they weren't losers, they were a long, long way from being winners. And this just captures that incredible limbo they were stuck in, caught between a home they couldn't have anymore and a future they never even asked for. So, how did it all come to this? Well, this first part explains the cold, hard logic behind everything. See, their fate wasn't sealed by some huge catastrophe, but by a simple, terrifying calculation. Think about that for a second. There was no big enemy to fight, no disaster to overcome. The reason for the single greatest exile in all of human history was just a quiet administrative problem. The Earth had simply run out of space. The decision was totally impersonal, purely mathematical, and absolutely final. And the reaction, it probably wasn't what you'd expect. No one was screaming, there were no riots. It was just this heavy, suffocating silence. You can almost feel the weight in that room, can't you? Shoulders slumping, everyone staring at the floor. They all knew protesting was pointless. This wasn't a punishment for some crime. They were just a number in a really devastating equation. And with that one decision, humanity was instantly split right down the middle. It created this incredibly stark division between the people who would get to carry on the story of Earth and those who would be forced to start a completely new one, somewhere else entirely. Wow. A single sentence spoken by some anonymous exile as they watched the Earth just shrink through a tiny window. It perfectly captures how final this all was. That thin blue line, the very thing that means home, that means life, suddenly becomes this untouchable memory. What can you even say to that? In that one single moment, two completely different realities were born. Back on Earth, the ones who stayed were called the chosen people, right? They were celebrated by the media as the great hope for the future. But in the cold silence of space, the others, they were just people in a cargo bay, voiceless onlookers forced to watch a party they were kicked out of. So what were they feeling, all packed into that ship, watching the celebrations on the planet they just left? Well, it was a pretty toxic mix. Of course, there was envy, there was jealousy, but maybe the worst part, the most painful part, was the self-loathing that came with it. The guilt for feeling that way about people who were, just like them. Okay, so let's talk about what was waiting for them. We tend to romanticize space exploration, but the reality for this generation was, well, it was anything but glamorous. There were no heroic adventures, no grand discoveries on the horizon. Their new home? It was harsh, unforgiving. The air was thin, the soil was hard as a rock, and the nights were just unnaturally long. Life became this simple, brutal cycle of just laboring to survive. In this new world, everybody was the same, stripped of their pasts, defined only by whether they could work and endure. But even with this grueling new life, they still look up. Every single night, they see that tiny blue dot in the sky. And it's this constant, painful reminder that back on that beautiful little speck, a chosen daily life is going on without them. A life with forests and oceans and ease. A life they can see, but can never ever go back to. And this question really gets us to the philosophical heart of their story. See, their suffering wasn't just about what they had to endure on this new planet. It was about the really strange, paradoxical nature of what they had lost. And this right here, this is the central feeling. It's not anger or despair that really defines them. It's this profound, very specific kind of loss. Nothing was actually stolen from them. Earth is still there, it still exists, but their place in it, their seat at the table, it's just gone, permanently. It's this unique grief for a home that's still there, but isn't theirs anymore. But even staring down this impossible grief, they didn't just give up. In their own quiet way, they started to build something new. Not just for themselves, but for history. It's a fair question, right? I mean, after losing your entire world, what on earth could possibly drive you to keep going, to try and build a future? Their hope is found in these simple, deeply human things. First, they have children, bringing a new generation into this incredibly harsh world.
Then they give names to their small, struggling settlements, trying to create a sense of place. And maybe most importantly, they keep a record. They make sure their story doesn't get forgotten.
And this is what they ultimately want. They don't want to be remembered as the losers of some cosmic lottery, the ones who got cast out. They hope that future generations will look back and see them as something more, as pioneers who made an unimaginable sacrifice, the very first generation that had to let go of our home planet.
But after all of it, after all the struggle, the resilience, the hope for what their legacy might be, the story ends with this, a quiet, absolutely heartbreaking confession. For all their attempts to reframe their story as some grand sacrifice, the simple, undeniable truth is still there. They never wanted to be pioneers. They just wanted to stay home.